My wife's sister presented my errors to senior leadership, showed slides of my failed calculations, got my promotion. I sat through her entire presentation without saying a word. After she finished, I asked one simple question that made the room go silent. Look, I've been through some rough situations in my 32 years on this planet. I once sat through a 4-hour timeshare presentation in Florida just to get a free breakfast buffet that turned out to be stale bagels and something they called juice, but was clearly just orange-flavored sadness. I've survived Thanksgiving dinners where my Uncle Jerry explained cryptocurrency for 3 consecutive hours while my soul slowly left my body. Hell, I even made it through my college roommate's experimental jazz phase, which was less music and more, what if we tortured a saxophone in front of a live audience? But nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the psychological warfare I was currently enduring in Conference Room B on this particularly soul-crushing Thursday afternoon. Picture this: a boardroom so quiet you could literally hear the fluorescent lights humming their song of corporate despair, and somewhere in the distance, I swear a spreadsheet was softly weeping. The temperature was set to that special kind of cold that makes you wonder if the AC is actually a cryogenic chamber designed to preserve middle management for future generations. Around the table sat 12 of my colleagues, each one wearing that glazed-over expression that said they'd rather be literally anywhere else, stuck in traffic, getting a root canal, watching paint dry in real time, you name it. And there I was, Daniel Cross, lead financial analyst and apparently today's main course, sitting through what could only be described as a 1-hour public execution disguised as a quarterly review presentation. The executioner? Oh, that would be Amber Lane, my wife's sister, self-proclaimed data visionary, and the human equivalent of a participation trophy that somehow convinced itself it deserved first place. She was standing at the front of the room with her wireless presentation clicker gripped in her hand like she'd just discovered the cure for inflation, world hunger, and my career all in one fell swoop. Her blonde hair was pulled back in one of those aggressively tight ponytails that screamed, "I'm here to destroy lives, and I have the hairspray to prove it," and she'd paired it with a power suit so aggressively red it looked like she'd mugged a fire engine on her way to work. Every single slide that flashed up on that massive screen behind her was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive corporate warfare. Red circles everywhere, like some deranged teacher had gone absolutely feral with a grading pen. Arrows pointing dramatically at numbers that I knew for a fact were perfectly calculated. Zoom-ins on sections of my financial model that would make a CSI crime scene photographer proud. She'd even added some kind of pulsing highlight effect to really drive home the "look at this idiot's mistakes" vibe she was going for. The presentation was titled Critical Analysis, Identifying and Correcting Forecasting Discrepancies in the Wellington Account Model. Translation: watch me end this man's whole career in Comic Sans. I wanted to clap, honestly. Not because I was impressed with her analytical skills. Those were about as sharp as a bowl of pudding. But because you had to admire the sheer audacity. The woman had stolen my work, twisted it like a pretzel, and was now serving it back to me as evidence of my own incompetence. That takes a special kind of sociopathic creativity that you just don't see every day in your average corporate environment. Each mistake she exposed with theatrical flair was actually a feature of a model I'd spent the last 6 months perfecting while she was busy taking 2-hour lunches and perfecting her "I'm very important" lean against door frames. The nonlinear volatility tracking she called erratic and unprofessional. That was specifically requested by Wellington's chief analyst. The risk assessment parameters she claimed were dangerously optimistic. Those were based on 15 years of historical data and 3 separate validation models. But sure, Amber, by all means, tell everyone how my doctorate in quantitative finance led me to make calculations that a sophomore statistics student could do better. Around the table, reactions varied from mildly uncomfortable to actively enjoying the show. Jenkins from accounting kept shifting in his seat like he desperately needed to pee but was too afraid to miss the drama. Rhonda from HR had her arms crossed and was nodding along like Amber was preaching the gospel according to Excel. And there was Marcus, bless him, my only actual friend in this corporate Thunderdome, who kept catching my eye and mouthing, "What the hell?" every 30 seconds while Amber droned on about fundamental calculation errors. But the real piece of work was sitting at the head of the table, our esteemed director, Paxton Webb. a man whose hairline had retreated so far back it looked like a chart of declining stock prices, and whose management style could best be described as aggressively ambivalent. He was watching Amber's presentation with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for people trying to understand IKEA instructions, occasionally nodding and making little sounds that could mean literally anything from "this is fascinating" to "I wonder what's for lunch." Amber clicked to another slide, this one showing a comparison between my flawed projections and her corrected analysis. The corrected analysis was, hilariously, just my original work with 2 decimal places moved and the formatting changed from blue to green. Groundbreaking stuff, really. She might as well have put a different font on the Constitution and claimed she'd written a new founding document. "As you can see," she said, her voice dripping with that special kind of fake concern that people use when they're about to throw you under a bus, but want everyone to think they're doing you a favor. "Daniel's approach shows creative thinking, which we value, but it lacks the rigorous methodology required for a client of Wellington's caliber. I've taken the liberty of restructuring the entire framework to ensure accuracy and reliability." Creative thinking. That was code for "he's an idiot, but I'm too polite to say it directly." And she was stealing my promotion right there in front of me, in front of everyone, while probably already mentally redecorating the office that should have been mine. The presentation finally, mercifully, came to an end after what felt like several geological eras. Amber clicked off the projector with a satisfied smile, the kind of smile a cat gives right after knocking your favorite mug off the counter and maintaining eye contact the whole time. She smoothed down her blazer and looked directly at me with fake sympathy that made my eye twitch. Then Paxton, blessed management oracle that he was, turned his receding hairline in my direction and asked the question I'd been simultaneously dreading and waiting for. "Daniel, you've been awfully quiet through all this. Do you have anything to say in response to these concerns?" The room went silent. Not regular quiet, but that special kind of silence where everyone's holding their breath waiting for someone to either explode or implode, and honestly either option would be entertaining at this point. I could feel 12 pairs of eyes boring into me, waiting to see if I'd crumble, if I'd argue, if I'd have a complete meltdown and flip the conference table like some kind of corporate action hero. I took a slow sip of my coffee, which had gone from lukewarm to cold during Amber's presentation and now tasted like bitter regret with a hint of betrayal. I set the cup down carefully, leaned back in my chair with the casual confidence of a man who'd been holding pocket aces the entire time, and smiled. Not a big smile, just a small one, the kind that suggested I knew something nobody else in the room did. "Just one question," I said. The room froze. Amber's triumphant expression flickered just slightly. And somewhere in the universe, karma started warming up in the bullpen. I wasn't always the guy silently watching his reputation get barbecued over lukewarm coffee while his sister-in-law played executioner with a laser pointer. There was actually a time, believe it or not, when I was what you might call the golden boy of Wellington Financial Analytics. I know, hard to picture now that I'm basically the corporate equivalent of a piñata, but stick with me here because this story gets worse before it gets better, which is really the American dream in reverse. 6 years ago, I walked into this company fresh out of grad school with my shiny new doctorate in quantitative finance, a head full of complex algorithms, and absolutely zero ability to engage in normal human small talk. I was that guy at company happy hours nursing a single beer for 3 hours while everyone else argued about whether Die Hard was a Christmas movie, and I'd be in the corner calculating the statistical probability of surviving a fall from Nakatomi Plaza. Fun at parties? Not exactly. Good at my job? Absolutely phenomenal. My specialty was building forecasting models so accurate they bordered on witchcraft. While everyone else was still using basic regression analysis and praying to the Excel gods, I was out here constructing neural networks that could predict market movements with the kind of precision that made senior analysts weep into their morning bagels. I didn't schmooze clients over golf games or spend 3 hours at lunch discussing my personal brand. I just did the work, did it brilliantly, and let the numbers speak for themselves. Turns out, in the corporate world, that's like bringing a calculator to a knife fight. Technically superior, but completely missing the point. My wife Mila loved that about me, at least initially. We met during my second year at the company at some charity gala that my boss forced me to attend. She was working in event coordination, I was hiding behind a decorative plant trying to avoid conversation, and somehow we ended up talking about the completely impractical architecture of the venue. She thought my social awkwardness was refreshing and authentic, which I later learned was code for, at least he's not pretending to be someone he's not. We got married 2 years later in a ceremony that was thankfully devoid of surprise PowerPoint presentations, and for a while there, life was pretty solid. Mila appreciated that I was low drama. No office politics, no backstabbing, no coming home and complaining about who stole whose yogurt from the communal fridge. I'd arrive home at 6:15 every evening like clockwork. We'd cook dinner together while I explained whatever mathematical concept I was currently obsessed with, and she'd nod along even though I'm pretty sure she stopped listening after, so the standard deviation. It was comfortable, predictable, and exactly the kind of boring stability that makes sitcom writers want to throw themselves off bridges, but makes actual humans pretty happy. Then Amber happened. Mila's younger sister was everything I wasn't. Loud, charismatic, and blessed with the kind of confidence usually reserved for people who've never experienced consequences for their actions. She'd bounced around between 5 different jobs in 3 years, each time leaving under circumstances she described as creative differences, but which I suspected were more like discovered I actually had to work. When she announced she was applying to Wellington Financial, I figured there was no way she'd get in. The woman's idea of quantitative analysis was calculating how to split a brunch bill 4 ways, and even then she usually got it wrong. But here's the thing about corporate America that nobody tells you when you're busy getting your doctorate. Charisma beats competence about 70% of the time. Amber waltzed into her interview, charmed the pants off Paxton with her vision for dynamic market engagement, or whatever meaningless buzzword salad she served up, and got hired as a junior analyst. This was 4 years ago, 2 years after I'd already established myself as the department's go-to guy for anything involving numbers more complicated than basic arithmetic. Mila was thrilled. "Now you two can carpool," she said, like I'd been secretly wishing for more quality time with someone who once asked me if Excel had spell check. "And you can help Amber learn the ropes. It'll be great for family bonding." Family bonding. Right. Because nothing says quality family time like teaching your sister-in-law that pivot table isn't a type of furniture. I tried, I really did. I'm not a complete monster. When Amber started, I showed her the basic systems, explained our reporting structures, even sat through a painful 2-hour session where I attempted to teach her the difference between correlation and causation. She kept checking her phone, reapplying lip gloss, and asking if we were almost done with the boring stuff. Still, I figured she'd find her groove eventually. Maybe she'd be great at client relations or presentation design, or literally anything that didn't require actual analytical thinking. The problem was that Amber didn't join Wellington Financial to work. She joined to audition. Every meeting was a performance. Every email was crafted like she was writing her Emmy acceptance speech. She treated the office like it was her personal season of Shark Tank, and she was going to get a deal with Mr. Wonderful or die trying. She'd volunteer for high-profile projects she was completely unqualified for, then charm her way into getting other people, usually me, to do the actual work while she handled the strategic vision, which apparently meant showing up to meetings and saying things like, "Let's circle back to that," and "I love the energy here." But family politics are a thing, especially when your wife's parents are constantly asking why you and Amber don't collaborate more, implying that maybe you're threatened by her fresh perspective. Fresh perspective. The woman thought quarterly earnings were called that because they happened 4 times a quarter. But Mila insisted we needed to get along and support each other. So I did what any rational person trying to maintain marital harmony would do. I swallowed my pride and tried to be helpful. The turning point came about 18 months ago. Amber had somehow talked her way onto the Morrison account, a mid-sized client that needed a basic risk assessment model. It was straightforward work, the kind of thing that should take maybe a week if you know what you're doing. 3 weeks in, Amber still hadn't produced anything usable. She'd created 17 different slide decks about her process, but hadn't actually built a functional model. Mila cornered me one evening while I was trying to watch a documentary about the 2008 financial crisis. "Amber's really struggling with this Morrison thing," she said, in that tone that wasn't quite asking, but also wasn't not asking. "Could you maybe just take a look? Give her some pointers." Pointers turned into building her entire model from scratch because her version was basically just a bunch of random numbers formatted to look professional. I gave her full access to my templates, my data sources, my methodology, everything. I figured she'd learn by example, and honestly, I just wanted to get back to my documentary. Big mistake. Enormous. Catastrophic. Like giving scissors to a toddler and hoping they'll cut paper instead of their own hair, the cat, and somehow the structural integrity of your entire home. Amber took that model, slapped her name on it, presented it as her own original work, and got praised by Paxton for her innovative approach to risk stratification. I didn't say anything because what was I going to do? Run to management and complain that my sister-in-law stole my work? That's not low drama Daniel. That's petty guy who can't handle his wife's sister's success Daniel. So I stayed quiet, congratulated her when Mila insisted, and told myself it was a one-time thing. Narrator voice, it was not a one-time thing. The Wellington account wasn't just any client. This was the Mount Everest of financial consulting contracts, the kind of opportunity that comes around maybe once in a career if you're lucky, and twice if you've made some kind of dark pact with the finance gods. We're talking about a multi-million-dollar international investment firm with tentacles in 16 countries. The kind of client that drops more money on quarterly consulting fees than most people see in a lifetime. Landing their business meant CEO attention, board recognition, and a potential raise big enough to finally make my student loans stop, sending me threatening letters written in what I can only assume is the financial equivalent of ancient curses. When Paxton announced in our morning meeting that Wellington was looking for a firm to build them a proprietary predictive model for emerging market volatility, I swear I heard angels singing. Or maybe that was just the coffee machine wheezing in the break room. But either way, this was my moment. Everything I'd been working toward, every late night building algorithms while my college friends were out living their best lives, every conference I'd attended where I was the youngest person in the room by 20 years, it all came down to this. The brief was beautiful in its complexity. Wellington wanted something that could predict market movements before they happened, a model that could analyze thousands of variables simultaneously and identify patterns invisible to traditional analysis. They wanted to see emerging market crashes coming from 3 months out. They wanted to know which tech startups in developing economies would boom and which would bust. Basically, they wanted a crystal ball, but one backed by rigorous mathematical proof and peer-reviewed methodology. In other words, they wanted exactly what I'd been building in various forms for the past 6 years. I spent 2 weeks crafting the proposal, barely sleeping, living on a diet of coffee and whatever food Mila forced into my hands when she caught me working at 3 in the morning. I built neural networks that would make MIT professors jealous. I incorporated machine learning algorithms that adapted in real time to market conditions. I created visualization dashboards so intuitive that even Paxton could understand them, which was saying something because the man once asked if algorithmic trading meant the algorithm was doing the actual buying and selling, like it had its own brokerage account and tiny algorithm hands. The model I designed was genuinely revolutionary, and I'm not just saying that because I built it. It used something called stochastic differential equations combined with sentiment analysis from 17 different global news sources, filtered through a proprietary weighting system I developed that accounted for regional economic indicators, historical precedent, and about 40 other variables that would take me another 3 paragraphs to explain. The point is, it worked. In backtesting, it predicted market movements with 87% accuracy, which in the world of financial forecasting is basically like predicting lottery numbers. I submitted the proposal on a Friday afternoon, felt pretty damn good about myself, went home, and actually had a normal weekend for once. Mila and I went to some farmer's market where I bought overpriced artisanal cheese and pretended to care about the difference between heirloom tomatoes and regular ones. Life was good. I was going to nail this presentation, get the promotion, maybe finally buy a car made in this decade. Then Monday morning rolled around and Paxton called me into his office with that look on his face that managers get when they're about to ruin your day, but frame it as an opportunity for growth. Daniel, fantastic work on the Wellington proposal. He started, which should have been my first warning sign because Paxton complimenting anyone was like seeing a unicorn. Technically possible, but deeply suspicious. Really fantastic. The technical specifications are exactly what they're looking for. I waited for the other shoe to drop. In corporate America, Compliments are just the appetizers before the main course of disappointment. Now, Wellington is very particular about client relations, Paxton continued, leaning back in his chair that probably cost more than my monthly rent. They want someone who can interface with their executive team, handle the presentation aspects, really sell the vision alongside the technical specs. Right? I said slowly. I can do presentations. I've done dozens of. We're assigning Amber as your collaborator on this one. And there it was. The other shoe, dropping like an anvil in a cartoon, flattening all my hopes and dreams into a two-dimensional pancake of corporate politics. Amber, I repeated, because surely I'd misheard. Maybe he said amber, like the color, and we were redecorating the presentation slides. Maybe he said Amber Alert and was warning me about something. Anything other than what he actually said. She's got great client-facing skills, Paxton explained, like this made any sense at all. Really knows how to work a room. You two will make an excellent team. Your technical expertise and her interpersonal finesse. Interpersonal finesse. That was one way to describe someone whose main skill was talking confidently about things she didn't understand. I wanted to argue, to point out that Amber's idea of technical expertise was knowing how to change the toner in the printer, but Paxton had that look that said the decision was already made and this conversation was just a courtesy to make me feel like I had a say in my own professional execution. She'll handle the client meetings and presentations, Paxton continued. You focus on building the model, making sure everything's technically sound. Play to your strengths, right? Translation: shut up, do the math, and let Amber take the glory. But what was I going to do? This was still the Wellington account. This was still my chance at that promotion, that raise, that sweet validation that I wasn't just some socially awkward numbers guy destined to crunch data in obscurity until I retired and became that old guy at parties who corners people to talk about the beauty of statistical modeling. So I smiled, nodded, and said, sure, sounds like a great partnership. Narrator voice: it was not a great partnership. The project kicked off the following week, and I immediately understood the dynamic we were working with. I would spend 18-hour days refining the model, testing scenarios, debugging code, and optimizing performance. Amber would show up to meetings with Wellington's team, flash her pageant smile, and say things like our innovative approach to market prediction, and we've developed a groundbreaking methodology, while gesturing vaguely at slides I'd created at 4 in the morning. I didn't mind at first, honestly. I told myself that everyone has a role to play, and if her role was being the face of the operation while I was the brain, well, that was fine. I'm not naturally comfortable in client meetings anyway. I have this unfortunate tendency to get too deep into technical explanations, and before I know it, I'm 45 minutes into explaining the mathematical proof behind Brownian motion while my audience's eyes have glazed over like donuts. Amber, meanwhile, could charm anyone. She'd walk into Wellington's boardroom, and let me tell you, their boardroom made our office look like a storage closet, wearing designer suits that probably cost more than my car, and within minutes she'd have their senior analysts eating out of her hand. She remembered their kids' names, asked about their golf handicaps, laughed at their jokes that weren't funny. She was good at the game in a way I'd never be. The model came together beautifully over the next 3 months. Every test I ran exceeded expectations. The accuracy rates were climbing. Wellington's chief analyst, Dr. Patel, kept sending emails with subject lines like impressive results and exactly what we needed. I figured, fine, let Amber bask in the reflected glory. The numbers don't lie, and when this thing goes live and starts making Wellington obscene amounts of money, everyone will know who actually built it. Spoiler alert, I was adorably naive. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning with the subject line, Wellington Account Review Meeting, Mandatory Attendance, which is corporate speak for clear your calendar or clear your desk. I was 3 coffees deep into debugging a minor issue with the model's Asian market parameters when I saw it, sent by Paxton at 7:30 in the morning because apparently sleep is for people without middle management anxiety. The meeting was scheduled for Thursday at 2 p.m. in Conference Room B, which was the fancy one with the big screen and the chairs that didn't squeak when you moved, reserved for either impressing clients or destroying careers. I assumed it was the former. Looking forward to presenting our final results to the team, Amber had replied all within literally 90 seconds, with enough exclamation points to trigger a punctuation warning. So excited to share what we've accomplished. We, our. What a generous use of plural pronouns for someone whose biggest contribution to the project was correctly spelling Wellington in her emails about 60% of the time. I should have known something was wrong when Amber started acting weird on Wednesday. She was always hovering around my desk, asking pointed questions about specific sections of the model with this strange intensity that felt less like curiosity and more like a lawyer deposing a witness. So this volatility tracking section, she'd say, peering over my shoulder at my screen with the subtlety of a hawk eyeing a field mouse. You're absolutely certain about these calculations? Like, you triple-checked them? Yes, Amber. I'd replied, not looking up from my work. I've been doing this for 6 years. I know how to check my calculations. Right, of course, she'd said. But there was something in her tone that felt off, like she was filing away information for later use. It's just that these numbers seem really aggressive. Bold, you know? Very bold choices. Bold choices. That should have been my second warning sign, right after the mandatory meeting email. When someone in corporate America starts calling your work bold, they're usually setting up to call it reckless about 5 minutes later. Thursday arrived with all the ominous energy of storm clouds gathering before a tornado. I showed up to conference room B 15 minutes early because punctuality is one of my few marketable personality traits, and found the room already half full. Jenkins from accounting was there, nervously organizing his pens by color. Rhonda from HR sat in the corner with her tablet, which was never a good sign because HR only took notes when someone was about to get documentation for a file. Marcus gave me a subtle head shake when I walked in, the universal bro signal for something's wrong, but I don't know what. The senior team filed in over the next 10 minutes. Paxton with his tragic hairline, our CFO Sandra Chun, who looked like she'd rather be literally anywhere else, and even Gerald Morrison, the CEO, which made my stomach drop because Gerald only showed up to meetings that were either extremely good news or catastrophically bad news, and given Amber's weird behavior, I wasn't betting on the former. Then Amber made her entrance. She strutted in wearing heels so sharp they could probably be classified as weapons in several states. Paired with a power suit so aggressively red, it looked like she'd mugged a fire engine and then had it professionally tailored. Her blonde hair was pulled back in one of those ponytails so tight I was concerned about her blood circulation, and she was carrying a leather portfolio that definitely cost more than my monthly student loan payment. She smiled at everyone like she was about to accept an Oscar, did this weird little wave at the CEO like they were old friends they'd met exactly once, and set up her laptop at the front of the room with the confidence of someone who'd never experienced consequences. "Thank you all for coming," she began, and my internal alarm system started blaring like a submarine about to implode. This was supposed to be our presentation. Our. She'd insisted on that plural pronoun for 3 months, and now suddenly it was just her thanking everyone. "I know we're all busy, so I'll get right to it," Amber continued, clicking to her first slide. The title appeared on the screen, Critical Analysis, Identifying and Correcting Forecasting Discrepancies in the Wellington Account Model. I'm sorry, what? My brain needed a solid 3 seconds to process what I was seeing because surely I'd misread it. Critical analysis? Discrepancies? This was supposed to be a celebration of our successful model, a victory lap before full implementation. I looked at Marcus, who looked at me with the expression of someone watching a car crash in slow motion. Jenkins had stopped organizing his pens. Even Paxton looked confused, which was saying something because confusion was basically his default state. Amber clicked to the next slide, and there it was, a screenshot of my model with red circles drawn around perfectly correct calculations like a teacher grading a failing exam. Big, aggressive red circles that screamed, "This is wrong," in visual form. "I'd like to address some concerning deviations in Daniel's forecasting model," she said, her voice dripping with fake concern so thick you could spread it on toast. She actually placed her hand on her chest like she was physically pained to be doing this. As his collaborator, I've had a front row seat to his process, and while I've tried to address these issues privately, I believe they're serious enough to warrant team discussion. The room temperature seemed to drop about 15 degrees. Everyone's attention swiveled to me like I'd just been accused of embezzlement. I sat there, coffee cup frozen halfway to my mouth, trying to process what was happening. This wasn't a presentation. This was a public execution, and I was the guest of dishonor. She made it sound like I'd accidentally crashed the global economy instead of building what was arguably the most sophisticated forecasting model Wellington had ever commissioned. Every slide was a new attack wrapped in corporate speak and false sympathy. Daniel's creative approach, she'd say, which everyone in that room knew was code for "this idiot doesn't know what he's doing." His unconventional methodology, meaning he's making it up as he goes. His aggressive risk parameters, translating to he's going to bankrupt our client and possibly trigger an international incident. My personal favorite was when she threw in this absolute gem. Daniel is a creative thinker, and we value that innovation here at Wellington Financial. We really do. But sometimes creativity crosses the line into chaos, and I think we've reached that point. Chaos. She actually said chaos. Like I was some kind of mad scientist building models in my basement while cackling maniacally, not a doctorate-holding analyst with 6 years of proven success. The only chaotic thing in this room was her confidence-to-competence ratio, which was so wildly skewed it should have been studied by mathematicians as proof that infinity actually exists. For 60 excruciating minutes, she systematically demolished every aspect of my work with the precision of a surgeon and the mercy of a honey badger. She questioned my data sources, the same sources Wellington specifically requested. She criticized my volatility calculations, which were based on peer-reviewed academic research. She even suggested that my visualization dashboards were unnecessarily complex, which was rich coming from someone who once asked me if we could just make the numbers bigger so they look more impressive. The entire time, I sat there sipping increasingly cold coffee like a man attending his own roast at a comedy club, except none of this was funny and I hadn't agreed to be here. People were taking notes. Rhonda was typing furiously on her tablet. Sandra Chun kept glancing at me with this expression that wasn't quite pity, but was definitely in the same neighborhood. Even Gerald looked concerned, and that man had the emotional range of a particularly stoic brick. When Amber finally clicked to her conclusion slide, recommended actions, complete model restructuring with enhanced oversight, I realized what this really was. This wasn't about fixing problems. This was a coup. She was going to take over the entire project, get the credit, get the promotion, and leave me looking like the incompetent idiot who couldn't build a functional model without adult supervision. The presentation mercifully ended, and Amber stood there basking in the aftermath like she'd just delivered a TED Talk that would change the world. The silence was so thick you could have cut it with a knife and served it at a funeral. Then Paxton turned to me with the expression of someone who'd rather be getting dental surgery without anesthesia. "Daniel," he said carefully, "you've been awfully quiet through all this. Do you have anything to say in response to these concerns?" The silence in that room was the kind you usually only experience right before a natural disaster hits. Thick, oppressive, and loaded with the sense that everything's about to change in a really dramatic way. 12 pairs of eyes were locked on me like I was a defendant waiting to hear a verdict, and honestly, the way Amber had just spent an hour roasting my professional reputation, I might as well have been. My coffee had gone from lukewarm to actively cold, probably out of sympathy for what it assumed was my imminent career death. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to be humming with anticipation, or maybe that was just the tinnitus from suppressing my rage for 60 consecutive minutes. Paxton was looking at me with this expression that I can only describe as, "Please don't make this worse," which was hilarious considering I wasn't the one who'd just committed professional murder via PowerPoint. Sandra Chun had her pen poised over her notepad like she was ready to document my final words for the company archives. Rhonda from HR had that look she gets when she's mentally calculating how many forms she'll need to fill out depending on how this conversation goes. And Gerald Morrison, our CEO, who probably made more in a day than I'd make in a year, was studying me with the cold, analytical stare of someone who'd built a financial empire by knowing exactly when someone was bluffing. Amber, meanwhile, was standing at the front of the room with this smile that was probably supposed to look sympathetic but came across more like a cat that had just cornered a mouse and was deciding whether to play with it before the kill. Her red power suit practically glowed with triumph. She'd just delivered what she thought was a flawless assassination of my credibility, and now she was waiting for me to either crumble into apologetic pieces or dig myself deeper with some desperate defense that would only make me look worse. Here's the thing about being underestimated your entire career. People forget you're actually good at what you do. They see the quiet guy who doesn't schmooze at happy hour, who'd rather run regression analyses than network, who brings the same lunch from home every day like some kind of creature of habit, and they assume you're soft. They assume you won't fight back. They assume you'll just take it when someone tries to torpedo your career, because confrontation makes you uncomfortable. They're not entirely wrong. Confrontation does make me uncomfortable. But you know what makes me more uncomfortable? Watching someone steal 6 months of my work and serve it back to me as evidence of my incompetence. I took one more sip of my terrible cold coffee, set it down with deliberate care, and leaned back in my chair with the casual energy of someone who'd just been dealt a royal flush and was trying really hard not to smile. The movement caught everyone's attention even more, if that was possible. Marcus leaned forward slightly, sensing something was about to happen. Jenkins had actually stopped breathing, which seemed medically concerning, but was probably just his natural response to workplace drama. "Daniel?" Paxton prompted again, sounding increasingly nervous. "Any response to the concerns Amber has raised?" I let the question hang there for exactly 3 seconds longer than was comfortable, watching Amber's confident smile start to flicker just slightly at the edges. Her left eye did this tiny twitch that I recognized from family dinners when someone was about to contradict one of her stories. She wasn't quite nervous yet, but there was a hairline crack forming in that armor of absolute certainty. "Just one question," I said finally, keeping my voice calm and pleasant, like I was asking about weekend plans instead of preparing to dismantle her entire presentation. The room somehow got even quieter. I'm pretty sure Jenkins actually did stop breathing this time. I turned my attention fully to Amber, making direct eye contact for the first time since her presentation started. If my calculations are so fundamentally flawed, so reckless and chaotic, can you explain why Wellington International specifically requested this exact model in their original project brief? Her smile froze like someone had hit pause on a video, just completely locked in place while her brain scrambled to process what I'd just said. I could practically see the gears turning behind her eyes, trying to figure out if I was bluffing, if I was confused, if maybe I'd finally snapped and was just making things up. "I'm sorry," she managed, her voice losing about 30% of its confident lilt. "The project brief," I continued, reaching into my bag with the calm deliberateness of a poker player revealing his cards. "The one Wellington sent when they commissioned this work. The one that very specifically outlines what they wanted." I pulled out a printed copy of the original brief, all 47 pages of it, which I'd been carrying around like a security blanket ever since Amber started acting weird yesterday. I'd printed it on a hunch, that little voice in the back of your head that whispers, "Cover your ass," when something feels off. Thank God for paranoia. "Page 17, Section 3, I said, flipping to the exact page and sliding the document across the conference table toward Paxton. The sound of paper on wood was the only noise in the room. Wellington specifically requested what they termed nonlinear volatility tracking with adaptive parameters. That's a direct quote. The exact methodology that Amber just spent 15 minutes calling nonsense and chaos. Paxton picked up the brief like it might explode. His eyes scanned the page, and I watched his expression shift from confused to surprised to something that looked suspiciously like anger. Sandra Chun leaned over to read along with him, her eyebrows climbing steadily toward her hairline. "The client's exact words," I continued, "because when you've got momentum, you don't stop, were that they wanted a model that could adapt in real time to market fluctuations using sophisticated stochastic modeling. They even cited 3 academic papers as examples of the approach they were looking for. I used all 3 as foundational research for my calculations." Amber's face had gone from confident red suit power to a shade of pale that suggested her circulatory system was having second thoughts about her life choices. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out except a sound like, but the risk parameters she called dangerously optimistic. I kept going, because honestly, this felt too good to stop. Page 22, Section 7. Wellington explicitly stated they wanted forward-looking projections that account for positive market trends, not conservative estimates. Their words, not mine. I pulled out another document, my original proposal with Wellington's approval signatures and margin notes. And here's Dr. Patel's feedback from Wellington's research division. He calls the volatility tracking precisely what we commissioned and the risk framework appropriately calibrated to our specifications. Gerald Morrison held out his hand for the documents without saying a word. He read them with the slow, careful attention of someone who'd built a career on knowing when someone was trying to con him. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 30 seconds. When he finally looked up, his eyes went straight to Amber. "Ms. Lane," he said, his voice carrying that particular quality of corporate disappointment that makes grown adults want to curl up and hide. "Can you explain this discrepancy?" Amber's left eye had graduated from a slight twitch to a full-blown spasm. Her confidence had drained faster than office Wi-Fi during lunch hour when everyone's streaming videos. She looked at the documents, then at me, then back at the documents like they might somehow rearrange themselves into something that supported her narrative. "Well, I was only concerned about the accuracy," she stammered, her voice now missing all that smooth presentation polish. "I mean, even if the client requested it, we have a responsibility to ensure that." "To ensure that what?" Sandra Chin cut in, and I'd never loved our CFO more than in that moment. "That we ignore the client's explicit requirements? That we override the specifications from their chief analyst?" Paxton was looking at his own copy of the brief now, and I could see the realization dawning on his face that he'd just sat through an hour-long presentation that was either based on complete incompetence or deliberate sabotage. Neither option made him look good for allowing it to happen. Marcus caught my eye from across the table and gave me the subtlest fist pump I've ever seen. Jenkins had resumed breathing and was now grinning like he'd just witnessed the greatest thing in corporate history. Even Rhonda from HR had stopped typing and was watching Amber with the expression of someone who'd just watched a house of cards collapse in real time. "Ladies and gentlemen, we had liftoff." The thing about corporate vindication is that it doesn't happen in a sudden, dramatic explosion like in the movies. There's no slow-motion shot of the villain getting led away in handcuffs while inspirational music plays. No, in real corporate America, revenge is served cold, bureaucratic, and with an overwhelming amount of follow-up emails that all need to be replied to with per my previous email energy. The meeting ended with Gerald Morrison doing that thing where powerful people stand up without saying anything, and everyone immediately knows the conversation is over. He collected the documents I'd provided, my safety net of paranoid documentation, and walked out with Paxton scrambling behind him like a puppy who knows he's about to get scolded for peeing on the expensive rug. Sandra Chin lingered just long enough to give me a nod that clearly said, "Well played," before following them out. The rest of the team filed out in uncomfortable silence, except for Marcus, who waited until Amber left before giving me a full fist bump and whispering, "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever witnessed in this hellhole." Amber herself practically ran out of that conference room, her designer heels clicking against the floor with the frantic rhythm of someone whose fight-or-flight response had firmly chosen flight. Her red power suit didn't look quite so powerful anymore, more like a target she'd painted on herself. I caught a glimpse of her face as she left, and if looks could kill, I'd have been filing for life insurance. But here's the thing about attempted career murder. When you miss, you better be ready for the consequences. I went back to my desk, opened my email, and did what any reasonable person would do after professionally eviscerating their sister-in-law in front of the entire senior management team. I ordered lunch from that Thai place that's definitely too expensive for a regular Thursday, but felt appropriate for a celebration. Pad Thai never tasted so good as when seasoned with the sweet, sweet flavor of vindication. By the next morning, the fallout had officially begun. I arrived at the office at my usual time, 7:45, because I'm predictable like that, to find that Paxton had already scheduled an emergency conference call with Wellington's lead researcher, Dr. Patel. This was the guy who'd been our primary contact throughout the project, a genuine genius with a PhD from Cambridge and the kind of calm, measured demeanor that made you trust everything he said. If Dr. Patel said your model was good, your model was good. If he said it was garbage, you started updating your resume. The call was scheduled for 8:30, which gave me just enough time to brew a proper pot of coffee and mentally prepare for what I assumed would be either my complete exoneration or the discovery that I'd somehow been wrong about everything and would need to move to a different country out of shame. Corporate anxiety is fun like that. Gerald Morrison joined the call personally, which told me this had escalated way beyond a simple project review. Paxton was there looking like he'd aged 5 years overnight, which frankly was an improvement on his usual expression. Sandra Chun participated from what looked like her car, apparently considering this important enough to dial in during her commute. And Amber was notably, gloriously absent. Dr. Patel, thank you for making time on short notice. Gerald opened, using his smooth CEO voice that probably cost him thousands in executive coaching. We wanted to clarify some questions that have arisen regarding the Wellington account model specifications. There was a brief pause, and then Dr. Patel's crisp British accent came through the speakers. Of course, though I must say, I'm rather surprised there are questions. Daniel's model is precisely what we commissioned. Exemplary work, really. I didn't pump my fist in the air, but it was a close call. Gerald continued. We had some internal concerns raised about the methodology, specifically the volatility tracking and risk parameters. Concerns? Dr. Patel sounded genuinely confused, which was deeply satisfying. From whom? Not from anyone who actually read our project brief, surely. Those specifications were quite explicit. We spent 6 months developing them with our research team before we even approached your firm. Paxton shifted uncomfortably in his chair, producing a squeak that sounded like a small animal in distress. There were questions about whether the approach was perhaps too aggressive. Aggressive? Dr. Patel actually laughed, which I don't think I'd ever heard him do before. Mr. Webb, we're not investing in treasury bonds here. We specifically sought out a model that could handle emerging market volatility with sophisticated adaptive algorithms. Conservative projections are useless to us. We can get those from any first-year analyst with Excel. What Daniel built is precisely the kind of forward-thinking analysis we need. Frankly, it exceeds our expectations. Gerald leaned back in his chair, looking directly at Paxton with an expression that suggested someone's performance review was going to be very interesting this year. That's very helpful clarification, Dr. Patel. We appreciate your time. After the call ended, Gerald stayed on the line. Daniel, stay? Everyone else, we're done here. The virtual meeting room cleared faster than a bar at last call. Suddenly, it was just me and the CEO, which was either very good or spectacularly bad, and I genuinely couldn't tell which. I've read through your proposal documents thoroughly, Gerald said, pulling up something on his screen. And I've reviewed the presentation from yesterday. Walk me through what happened. So I did. I gave him the whole story. The Morrison account where I'd foolishly helped Amber, how she'd been assigned to Wellington as my collaborator, the 3 months of me doing the actual work while she handled the meetings. I kept it professional, stuck to facts, didn't editorialize about her competence or lack thereof. When I finished, Gerald was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She tried to take credit for your work by discrediting you first. Classic move. Stupid, but classic. Yes, sir. You'll be taking over the Wellington account solo. Amber is being reassigned to a different team effective immediately." He paused. "We're also creating a new senior analyst position. If you're interested, it's yours. Comes with a substantial raise and your own team." I had to physically stop myself from doing a victory dance in my desk chair. "I'm very interested. Thank you." "Don't thank me. You earned it. Just do me a favor and actually delegate sometimes. Can't have my senior analysts burning out before 40. The call ended, and I sat there for a solid minute just processing what had happened. I'd gone from public humiliation to promotion in less than 24 hours. This was the corporate equivalent of getting knocked down in the first round and coming back with a knockout punch in the second. The news spread through the office faster than rumors about free donuts in the break room. By lunch, everyone knew Amber had been reassigned to some back-end reporting position that was basically corporate Siberia. Marcus brought cupcakes to my desk, just because. Even Jenkins stopped by to tell me he'd always believed in my methodology, which was definitely not true, but I appreciated the sentiment. My phone stayed suspiciously quiet all day. No congratulations text from Mila. No calls. Nothing. That was fine. I'd deal with the home front later. Right now, I was enjoying my first drama-free afternoon in months. That night, I got home around 7 to find Mila sitting at the kitchen table with her laptop, a glass of wine, and the expression of someone who'd been practicing a speech all day. "Congratulations on the promotion," she said with all the enthusiasm of someone congratulating a parking ticket on being successfully issued. "Thanks," I replied carefully, setting down my bag and trying to read the room. The room was reading hostile with a chance of uncomfortable conversations. Amber called me. There it was. She's pretty upset. I imagine she is. She said you humiliated her in front of the entire senior team. Mila's tone had that edge that wives develop when they're trying to be fair but are definitely taking someone's side, and it wasn't mine. I poured myself a glass of water, took a breath, and turned to face her. Amber spent an hour trying to destroy my career with a presentation full of incorrect accusations. I simply pointed out that she was wrong. With documentation. That's not humiliation, that's fact-checking. She was just trying to ensure quality control. Mila. I cut her off, which I almost never did. She didn't read the project brief. She didn't understand the client requirements. She tried to take credit for my work by making me look incompetent. That's not quality control. That's sabotage. We stared at each other across the kitchen, and I could see her mentally calculating whether defending her sister was worth the argument she could sense coming. She's family, Mila finally said. So am I replied. And I'd appreciate it if my wife could maybe be happy that I didn't just lose my job. She sighed, took a long sip of wine, and we agreed to table the discussion for later, which in marriage language means we're both mad but too tired to fight about it properly. As I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling while Mila fake slept on the other side, I realized that winning at work doesn't always mean winning at home. But I take it. You know that feeling when you win something big and you're riding high on the adrenaline of victory, thinking you've finally caught a break, and then the universe looks at you and says, "Hold my beer." Yeah, that's where I found myself about 2 weeks after my triumphant Wellington vindication. Because apparently, in the corporate world, defeating your enemies just means they upgrade their tactics from publicly embarrassing to covertly destructive, and honestly, I should have seen it coming. It started small, the way most horror stories do. I came into work on a random Wednesday morning, grabbed my usual coffee from the break room, black, no sugar, because I'm boring like that, and settled in at my desk to review the latest Wellington data. I opened my project folder and found exactly nothing. Not corrupted files, not misplaced documents, just an empty folder staring back at me like the void itself had developed a taste for financial models. My first thought was that I'd opened the wrong folder, because surely I hadn't just lost 3 weeks of work on the Wellington expansion project. I checked my recent files, my desktop, my downloads folder. Nothing. Gone. Vanished. Thanos snapped out of existence. My heart rate jumped from resting to, "Oh God, what have I done?" in about 3 seconds flat. Fortunately, because I'm paranoid and have trust issues that would make a conspiracy theorist look chill, I'd backed everything up to the company cloud server the night before. Crisis averted. I restored the files, chalked it up to some weird computer glitch, and went about my day thinking the tech gods had briefly forgotten I existed. 2 days later, I opened my quarterly forecast presentation for the board meeting and found that every single chart had been flipped upside down. Not rotated, not corrupted, literally inverted, so all my growth projections looked like catastrophic declines and vice versa. It was like someone had taken my presentation and run it through a funhouse mirror. Except this wasn't fun, and the only thing reflected was my growing rage. I fixed it, double-checked everything 17 times, and saved multiple backup copies across different platforms, because at this point I was pretty sure I was either losing my mind or someone was actively screwing with me. Given my recent history with a certain red suit-wearing sociopath, I had a pretty good guess which one it was. The following Monday, I tried to log into my computer and got a message that my password was incorrect. I tried again, incorrect. A third time, account locked for security reasons, please contact IT. I'd used the same password for 2 years, and suddenly my muscle memory was gaslighting me? I don't think so. I trudged down to the IT department, which was located in the basement like we were working in some kind of tech dungeon, and found my buddy Jin surrounded by approximately 40 monitors and what looked like the contents of a Radio Shack that had exploded. Jin was one of those IT guys who treated computers like they were sentient beings deserving of respect and treated humans like necessary annoyances who kept breaking said computers. "Let me guess," he said without looking up from whatever digital surgery he was performing. "Login issues?" "How'd you know?" "Because you're the third person this week with mysterious account problems, and the other 2 also happen to work on high-profile projects." He finally looked at me, adjusting his glasses that were perpetually sliding down his nose. "Someone's been playing with the authentication system." "Can you tell who?" Jin's fingers flew across his keyboard with the speed of someone who'd learned to type before they learned to walk. "Technically, no. The The logs are clean. But he pulled up something that looked like the Matrix had a baby with an Excel spreadsheet. There's been unusual access patterns from a terminal in conference room C. Late nights, weekends. Someone who shouldn't be here is definitely here. Conference room C was right next to the back-end reporting bullpen where Amber had been reassigned. Coincidence? In a world where gravity exists and water is wet, maybe. In this office? Absolutely not. I fixed my login, changed my password to something that would take a supercomputer about 1,000 years to crack, and went back to my desk feeling like I was developing a legitimate paranoid personality disorder. The problem with paranoia is that sometimes you're actually right, and being right doesn't make you feel better, it just makes you more paranoid. That night, I did something I'm not particularly proud of. I started keeping physical backups of everything. I'm talking printed documents, external hard drives hidden in my desk drawer, USB sticks in my gym bag. I became that guy who saves 17 versions of the same file with increasingly elaborate naming conventions like Wellington _ model _ final _ V3 _ actual _ final _ for _ real _ this _ time. I was sleeping maybe 4 hours a night, jolting awake at 2 in the morning convinced I'd forgotten to back up something crucial. Mila noticed, obviously, because subtle I am not. "You're being paranoid," she said one evening while I was backing up files at 11 p.m. instead of, sleeping like a normal human being. "I'm being prepared," I corrected, clicking save for the 18th time. "Amber's not even on your team anymore. She's in a completely different department. You won. Can you please just let it go?" Let it go. Right. Because people who try to destroy your career with PowerPoint definitely just accept defeat gracefully and move on with their lives. That's definitely how vindictive people work. I didn't bother arguing because Mila had made it crystal clear that she considered the whole Wellington incident resolved, and any continued concerns about her sister were just me being unable to move forward. Family loyalty is a hell of a drug, and my wife was apparently mainlining it. The weirdness continued for another week. Files mysteriously moving folders, email drafts disappearing, my desk chair adjusted to a height that suggested someone who wasn't me had been sitting in it. I started coming in earlier, leaving later, basically treating the office like a crime scene that I needed to monitor personally. Then Jin called me down to IT again on a Friday afternoon with the kind of urgency in his voice that suggested either something was very wrong or very interesting, possibly both. "She's been accessing your files," he said when I arrived, pulling up logs that looked like digital hieroglyphics to my non-IT brain. "We're trying to. Your security settings keep blocking her, but she's definitely attempting to get into your project folders. Can you prove it's her?" "Not definitively. She's using a guest login that doesn't officially exist, which is either impressive or concerning depending on your perspective." He scratched his head, making his already messy hair look like he'd been electrocuted. "But she screwed up yesterday. Left a session open in conference room C. The login trail leads back to her employee ID. Can we report this?" Jin gave me a look that suggested I'd just asked if we could report that water was wet. Report what? That someone maybe possibly accessed files they might have had legitimate reasons to access? Without concrete proof of malicious intent, IT security won't do anything. Corporate politics, man. I left the IT dungeon feeling like I was trapped in some kind of corporate psychological thriller where the villain had already been defeated but refused to die. Like I was in a horror movie and had forgotten that you always need to double-tap the zombie or it comes back for the sequel. That weekend, I did what any rational person would do when they suspect they're being sabotaged. I deep dove into LinkedIn stalking. I pulled up Amber's profile, which she updated with the frequency of someone running for office, and that's when I saw it. Thrilled to announce my new position as Director of Strategic Forecasting at Criterion Analytics. I read it 3 times to make sure I wasn't hallucinating. Criterion Analytics, our biggest competitor, the firm that had been trying to poach Wellington as a client for the past 2 years. And Amber had just waltzed into a director position, a title that definitely hadn't existed before, doing specifically the work I was known for. The announcement was 2 days old, which meant while I'd been paranoid about file tampering and login issues, she'd been interviewing with the competition. The tech sabotage wasn't petty revenge, it was intelligence gathering. She'd been trying to steal my methodologies, my models, my actual work to take with her to Criterion. I sat there on my couch, laptop burning my thighs, while Mila watched some reality show about people buying houses they definitely couldn't afford. My forecasting model had predicted market trends with 87% accuracy. Somehow I'd failed to predict that my sister-in-law was essentially committing corporate espionage. "Everything okay?" Mila asked during a commercial break. "Just work stuff," I replied, because how do you tell your wife that her sister just joined your biggest competitor and has probably been stealing proprietary information? You don't. You bottle it up like a functional adult and wait for the inevitable explosion. I closed my laptop and smiled. "Actually, everything's fine." Narrator voice. Everything was not fine. My model had been right about one thing, though. I'd predicted a storm was coming. I just hadn't realized I was going to be standing in the middle of it holding nothing but an umbrella made of corporate policy and increasingly questionable life choices. There's a special kind of anger that transcends normal human emotion. It's not the hot, explosive rage that makes you punch walls or send emails you immediately regret. No, this is the cold, calculated fury that makes you meticulously plan someone's professional demise with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker and the vindictive satisfaction of a supervillain who's finally figured out the hero's weakness. And let me tell you, when I saw the announcement for the National Financial Forecasting Conference with Amber's face plastered across the promotional material, I achieved that special level of zen-like rage that probably should have concerned me, but instead felt oddly empowering. The email invitation landed in my inbox on a Tuesday morning. One of those mass promotional blasts that usually gets immediately deleted along with the 17 LinkedIn connection requests from people I've never met. Join us for a groundbreaking presentation by Criterion Analytics' newest Director of Strategic Forecasting, Amber Lane, as she unveils revolutionary predictive modeling techniques that are reshaping the industry. Revolutionary. That was a funny way to spell blatantly stolen from her brother-in-law while pretending to be concerned about quality control. I clicked through to the conference website, which had clearly been designed by someone who thought more gradient effects automatically meant more credibility, and there it was, Amber's keynote presentation scheduled for the main ballroom at the Hyperion Hotel downtown. The session description made me laugh out loud at my desk, which caused Jenkins to peer over his cubicle wall with concern. Advanced volatility tracking, a new paradigm in emerging market analysis. A new paradigm. My paradigm. The one I'd developed over 6 years of research and about 4,000 hours of work that had aged me prematurely and given me a caffeine dependency that concerned medical professionals. The conference was in 3 weeks. Plenty of time for Amber to polish her presentation about her groundbreaking work. Also plenty of time for me to help her out with it, because I'm thoughtful like that. I wasn't even mad anymore, which was somehow worse than being mad. I'd transcended anger and reached a state of almost academic appreciation for the sheer audacity. She'd stolen my code, my formulas, my entire methodological framework, and even, I kid you not, my specific color scheme for data visualization. The woman had copied my work down to the exact shade of blue I used for confidence intervals. That takes a special kind of brazen that you almost have to respect, like being impressed by a pickpocket who steals your wallet and then tries to sell it back to you. I spent the rest of that day in what I can only describe as a fugue state of productive scheming. On the surface, I was running my normal analyses, attending my usual meetings, responding to emails with appropriate professional courtesy. But in my head, I was orchestrating something that would make Machiavelli slow clap. The beautiful thing about being underestimated your whole career is that nobody suspects you're capable of elaborate revenge plots. Quiet Daniel, who brings the same turkey sandwich for lunch every day? Nah, he's too passive for retaliation. He'll probably just write a stern email and call it justice. Wrong. That evening, I stayed late at the office, not unusual for me, which was convenient for what I was planning. I pulled up everything I had on the Wellington model. The original specifications, my development timeline with timestamps, every iteration and version saved with meticulous detail, because I have organizational issues that occasionally work in my favor. I created a beautiful side-by-side comparison document showing my original work next to what I knew Amber would present. It was like one of those expectation versus reality memes, except both sides looked identical because she'd literally copied my homework. The masterstroke, though, was finding that one typo I'd made in version 12 of the model, a transposed digit in a reference formula that didn't affect the calculations but was distinctive enough to be a fingerprint. I'd caught it and fixed it in version 13, but if Amber had stolen version 12 like I suspected, that typo would be in her presentation. It was the mathematical equivalent of leaving a trap for someone copying your work, except I'd done it accidentally and was now retroactively calling it genius. Marcus found me around 8 p.m., still at my desk surrounded by printouts and looking like a beautiful mind detective board without the actual string connecting everything. Dude, you okay? You've got that look. What look? The look people get right before they do something either really brilliant or really stupid, and it's honestly 50-50 which one. He leaned against my cubicle wall, arms crossed. This is about Amber, isn't it? I filled him in on the conference, the keynote, the whole situation. Marcus listened with increasing delight, his grin growing wider with each detail. So what are you going to do? I'm going to help her with her presentation, I said innocently. Help her? Yep. Make sure she has all the visual aids she needs for a comprehensive, thorough demonstration of her work. Marcus's eyes lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. You beautiful, petty genius. What do you need? What I needed, it turned out, was information about how conference presentations actually worked. I'd been to plenty of these things, but never paid attention to the technical side. I just showed up, gave my talk from my own laptop, and left. But for larger keynotes with hundreds of attendees, presentations usually got loaded onto the venue's system ahead of time for quality control and to avoid technical difficulties, which meant there was a window of opportunity between when Amber submitted her slides and when she actually presented. I spent the next week doing something I'm particularly good at: research. I found out the conference used a company called Event Tech Solutions for their presentation management. I learned that presenters typically submitted slides 5 to 7 days before the event. I discovered that the system allowed for last-minute technical updates if you had the right access credentials. And most importantly, I found out that the event coordinator was a woman named Patricia who answered her phone during business hours and was remarkably trusting when someone called claiming to be from the tech team doing quality assurance testing. Look, I'm not saying I'm proud of what I did next. I'm just saying that sometimes righteous indignation plus technical knowledge plus a complete lack of moral supervision equals creative problem solving. I called Event Tech Solutions exactly 1 week before the conference, using my most professional voice, the one I reserve for dealing with difficult clients and IRS auditors. Hi, this is Daniel Cross from the Wellington Financial Technical Team. We're coordinating with Criterion Analytics for their keynote presentation and wanted to run some compatibility tests on the slides before the event. Patricia, bless her trusting soul, bought it completely. Oh, wonderful. We always appreciate presenters who want to test ahead of time. Do you have the file access code? I didn't, but I had something better: the ability to sound incredibly confident while completely winging it. We're working with Ms. Lane's assistant on the coordination. Is there a way we could access the presentation portal to upload some test slides? We've had issues in the past with font rendering and want to make sure everything displays correctly. There was typing on the other end. I can send you a coordinator access link. This would let you view and edit any presentations submitted for the conference. Just for testing purposes, of course. Of course, I agreed, already grinning. Purely for technical verification. She sent me the link. I had access to Amber's presentation by that evening. Opening her slide deck was like watching a crime documentary where they reveal the murder weapon. There it was. My entire Wellington model, rebranded as the Lane methodology for advanced market prediction. She'd even created a fake development timeline that started right when she joined Criterion, as if she'd built this masterpiece in 6 months while I was apparently sitting around doing nothing for the past 6 years. And there, buried in slide 47, was my typo. The transposed digit in the reference formula. Proof positive that she'd stolen version 12. I sat there for a solid 5 minutes, just appreciating the evidence. Then I got to work. I created what I called supplementary materials, additional slides that would blend seamlessly into her presentation at key moments. A side-by-side comparison showing her slide next to my original with timestamps. A close-up of that beautiful typo with a helpful arrow pointing it out. A chart showing the development timeline of my original model overlaid with her claimed timeline. I even included some of my email correspondence with Wellington where they specifically praised my methodology, with dates conveniently visible. The trick was making it subtle enough that she wouldn't catch it during her pre-presentation review, assuming she did one, which was 50-50 given her attention to detail, but obvious enough that the audience would immediately understand what they were seeing. I embedded them as hidden slides that would only appear if someone clicked through normally, spaced throughout her presentation like landmines waiting to explode. I uploaded everything using Patricia's coordinator link, tested it 3 times to make sure it worked, and then closed my laptop with the satisfaction of someone who'd just completed a masterpiece. Jin called me the next day. I heard through the IT grapevine that you've been doing some creative technical work. I have no idea what you're talking about. Uh-huh. Well, hypothetically, if someone were to have done something clever involving conference presentation systems, I'd want to remind them that digital fingerprints exist and covering tracks is important. Hypothetically, I might have noticed some unusual access logs and cleaned them up. You know, routine maintenance. God bless IT departments and their flexible interpretation of security protocols. Was it petty? Absolutely. Was it deserved? Without question. Was I going to feel bad about it? Check back with me never. The National Financial Forecasting Conference was being held at the Hyperion Hotel, which was one of those massive downtown convention centers that tries way too hard to look futuristic and ends up looking like a spaceship designed by someone who'd never actually seen a spaceship. All glass and chrome, and those weird geometric light fixtures that probably cost more than my car, but looked like they came from a discount modern art sale. The lobby was packed with financial analysts in various states of business casual, all wearing lanyards, and that specific expression people get at professional conferences. A mixture of genuine interest, networking anxiety, and the dawning realization that the continental breakfast wasn't going to cut it for the whole day. I'd registered under my personal email rather than my work one, paid the frankly ridiculous $300 admission fee out of my own pocket, and showed up wearing jeans and a blazer like I was just another attendee interested in market forecasting trends. Nobody from Criterion would recognize me. I'd never dealt with them directly, and my LinkedIn profile picture was from 2019 when I had different glasses and significantly more optimism about humanity. I was functionally invisible, which was exactly how I wanted it. The conference schedule had Amber's keynote as the 11 a.m. session in the Grand Ballroom, which was apparently their biggest venue and could hold about 400 people. I grabbed what the hotel was generously calling coffee from the refreshment station. It tasted like someone had explained the concept of coffee to hot water and hoped for the best, and a handful of those sad mini muffins that conferences always serve, the ones that are about 60% wrapper and 40% disappointment. Then I strategically positioned myself near the back of the ballroom, far enough from the stage that I wouldn't be noticed, but close enough to see everything unfold in glorious high definition. The room filled up fast. Apparently, Criterion had done a solid job promoting their revolutionary new methodology, and financial analysts love nothing more than the promise of an edge in predictive modeling. It's like catnip for nerds. People filed in clutching their programs, finding seats, doing that awkward small talk thing where everyone pretends they remember meeting at last year's conference. I spotted a few familiar faces from the industry, analysts from competing firms, a couple of academics I recognized from published papers, and holy shit, was that Dr. Patel from Wellington sitting in the third row? This just got infinitely better. Dr. Patel was sitting there with a tablet and a notepad, looking exactly like someone who took professional presentations very seriously. Which made sense because the man had a Cambridge PhD and had probably sat through about 10,000 presentations in his career, most of which were probably terrible. He would absolutely recognize my work if he saw it. Hell, he'd praised it extensively during the Wellington contract. Having him in the audience was like having a surprise expert witness show up at your trial. Unplanned, but absolutely perfect. The lights dimmed at exactly 11. Because conferences run on the kind of rigid scheduling that makes German trains look spontaneous. A woman in a Criterion Analytics blazer took the stage to do the introduction, going through Amber's completely fabricated credentials with the enthusiasm of someone reading a phone book. Director of Strategic Forecasting, pioneering work in volatility prediction, revolutionary methodologies. I had to bite my muffin to keep from laughing, which was a mistake because it tasted like sweetened cardboard and regret. Then Amber made her entrance. She was dressed to kill in a silk designer outfit that probably cost what I made in a month, her hair in perfect waves that had definitely required professional intervention, looking like she was about to give a TED Talk that would change the world. The confidence radiating off her could have powered a small city. She walked to the podium like she owned not just the room, but the entire concept of financial forecasting, smiled at the audience with those perfectly whitened teeth, and clicked her remote to start the presentation. "Good morning, everyone," she began, her voice projecting with the practiced ease of someone who'd rehearsed this in front of a mirror approximately 1,000 times. Today, I'm thrilled to share with you a breakthrough in predictive modeling that represents years of dedicated research and innovation. Years. Plural. My years, specifically, but who's counting? The first few slides went fine. Title card, introduction to criterion analytics, some generic statements about the importance of accurate market forecasting. Standard opening stuff that could have applied to literally any presentation ever given about finance. The audience was attentive, but not particularly excited yet. Just analysts being politely professional while checking their phones under the table. Then she got to the meat of it. "The Lane methodology," she announced, clicking to a slide that showed her volatility tracking framework. It was my model down to the last decimal point, my color scheme, my specific way of visualizing confidence intervals. I'd spent months perfecting that visualization because standard charts made complex volatility patterns look like abstract art, and she was presenting it like she'd birthed it fully formed from her own genius. "Traditional forecasting relies on linear assumptions," she continued, really getting into her rhythm now. "But markets aren't linear. They're chaotic, unpredictable, influenced by countless variables. What I've developed is a nonlinear approach that adapts in real time." Click. The slide changed to show exactly what she described, and right next to it, a second image appeared. My original slide from the Wellington presentation. Same content, same formatting. Timestamped 6 months before she even joined Criterion. The slides sat there side by side like twins separated at birth and reunited on Jerry Springer. The audience stirred. I heard someone in the second row say, "Wait, what?" Amber froze mid-gesture, her perfectly practiced hand movement suspended in air like someone had pressed pause on reality. She stared at the screen, and I watched in real time as her brain tried to process what was happening. You could practically see the Windows error message playing behind her eyes. "There must be a..." she started, clicking her remote to advance. The presentation moved forward, showing her next explanation of the risk parameters. Click. Another comparison slide appeared. Her version and my original, date stamped from the Wellington project, sitting side by side like evidence in a trial. This one even included a helpful arrow pointing to a section with the caption, "Note, identical methodology and parameters." The murmuring in the audience got louder. People were leaning forward now, actually paying attention instead of scrolling through emails. Dr. Patel had put down his tablet and was studying the screen with the intensity of someone who'd just recognized something very familiar. Amber was visibly panicking now, her polished composure cracking like ice on a warming lake. She clicked faster, trying to get past the comparison slides, but I'd embedded them throughout the entire presentation. Every major point she tried to make was immediately followed by proof that it wasn't her major point at all. It was like watching someone trying to run from their own shadow. "This is clearly a technical issue," she announced to the audience, her voice losing that smooth professional quality and gaining a slightly manic edge. "I apologize for these display errors. Let me just..." She clicked again. The slide that appeared showed the development timeline she'd fabricated, with her work supposedly beginning 6 months ago. Right next to it, my actual development timeline from the Wellington project, stretching back over 2 years. And as a special bonus, a screenshot of an email from Dr. Patel to me from 18 months ago with the subject line Impressive Volatility Framework. Dr. Patel stood up. In a room of 400 people, he stood up, and when a Cambridge PhD stands up during a presentation, everyone notices. "Excuse me," he said, his British accent cutting through the awkward silence like a scalpel. "That volatility framework, that's Daniel Cross's work. From the Wellington International contract. I commissioned it personally." The room exploded into whispers. Heads turned. People were pulling out their phones, probably Googling my name and the Wellington contract. Amber looked like she'd been slapped with a frozen fish, shocked, confused, and increasingly aware that she was about to become the main character in the worst possible way. "There appears to be some confusion," she tried, but her voice was shaking now. The confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by the desperate energy of someone watching their career implode in real time. I couldn't help myself. I raised my hand, still holding my sad conference muffin like a trophy. Actually, I called out from the back, and about 300 heads swiveled in my direction. There's no confusion. This is my work. From the Wellington contract, like Dr. Patel said, I built that model over 6 years. Even kept the typo from version 12. It's on slide 47 if you want to check. Amber's face went from panic to recognition to pure horror in about 3 seconds. She finally spotted me in the back, and if looks could kill, I'd need to update my life insurance policy. But it was too late. The damage was done. The evidence was overwhelming. Her revolutionary methodology had been exposed as wholesale intellectual theft in front of 400 industry professionals and at least one very important client. This is outrageous. She tried one last time, but her voice cracked. I don't know who's responsible for sabotaging my presentation, but seems pretty accurate to me, I said, taking a bite of my terrible muffin with the casual energy of someone who'd just won the lottery. The room actually laughed, nervous laughter, but laughter nonetheless. Amber stood there for another 3 seconds, clicked her remote one more time like maybe the next slide would somehow save her, and then apparently decided that dignity was overrated. She grabbed her things and practically ran off the stage, her designer heels clicking out a rapid retreat that echoed through the now completely silent ballroom. A representative from Criterion Analytics, some senior VP who'd been sitting in the front row looking increasingly concerned, stood up and made his way to the stage with the grim determination of someone about to do damage control. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the confusion. Criterion Analytics takes intellectual property very seriously and will be investigating this matter immediately. Translation: Amber was about to get fired so fast it would make the speed of light look like a casual stroll. Dr. Patel caught my eye from across the room and gave me a small nod that clearly said, "Well played." Marcus would be so proud when I told him about this. I'd become the stuff of office legend, the quiet analyst who'd taken down a corporate thief with nothing but documentation and perfectly timed slideshow sabotage. I finished my muffin, dumped my terrible coffee in the nearest trash can, and walked out of that ballroom feeling like I'd just completed the most satisfying project of my entire career. Revenge, it turns out, really is best served cold, and preferably in PowerPoint format with plenty of backup documentation. A week after the conference catastrophe, Criterion Analytics issued a carefully worded statement that basically translated to "Amber Lane has been fired, and we're pretending we had no idea she was a fraudulent disaster." The official line was, "Ms. Lane has left the company by mutual agreement to pursue other opportunities," which is corporate speak for she's unemployed and probably updating her resume while stress-eating ice cream and blaming Mercury retrograde for her problems. The financial industry loves gossip more than teenage girls at a sleepover, so the story spread faster than a data breach at a social media company. I became something of an underground legend, the quiet analyst who'd orchestrated the most spectacular conference takedown in recent memory. Dr. Patel sent me a bottle of extremely expensive scotch with a note that just said, "Brilliant." Marcus made me recount the story at least 7 times to different people in the office who wanted to hear it directly from the source. Paxton, sensing an opportunity to look like he'd been on my side all along, offered me a new title, Chief Methodology Officer, with a raise substantial enough to make my student loans actually seem manageable for the first time in a decade. I accepted with the kind of calm satisfaction that comes from knowing you've won so completely that gloating would be redundant. The best part? The absolute sweet silence from Amber. No texts, no calls, no passive-aggressive social media posts. Just beautiful, peaceful nothingness. When Mila tentatively asked if I'd forgiven her sister over dinner one night, I smiled and said, "Of course. Forgiveness is free, just like her career now." Sometimes revenge doesn't need shouting or drama. It just needs good documentation, perfect timing, and the patience to watch someone destroy themselves with their own stolen PowerPoint. And if you ever find yourself in a meeting where someone's publicly trying to destroy your work, don't panic. Just wait, smile, and ask one simple question. The rest will handle itself.